Hello and welcome to Homeschool Together Reviews. Thank you for joining us. If you have a chance, hit the subscribe button down below. Make sure we get more of our reviews into your YouTube inbox. Today we are talking about the Build Your Library Level 1 Ancient Civilizations. We're going to go through the entire curriculum, which costs about $40. You can, if you pay attention, might get a deal or two on certain times of the year. Subscribe to the newsletter. You might get a little discount for you if you're looking forward. This is a digital curriculum. As you can see, we've printed it off into a binder, and that's what I would suggest you to do. It's the best way to manage it as you go through the curriculum, but also having the digital files printed out allows you to consume them and then print them off again if you're going to go through it again with another child or another series of children. This is a great curriculum. It's a social studies curriculum, covers everything: history, mythology, poetry, art, science, a little bit of handwriting. Your basic, obviously, your literature selections are stellar when it comes to Build Your Library, probably the best out there. And for $40 and a library card, you can't go wrong. This is a curriculum that we have finished, and I have all the links to the videos down below where we vlogged our way through this curriculum. Covers about 36 weeks. Now, is it going to be 36 weeks for you? That's probably, maybe, but it could go a little longer, could go a little shorter based on what you guys like and what you guys enjoy and how your child reacts to them. You may find a civilization that you want to spend a little bit more time with. Maybe you have some ancestry in a certain area. You want to spend a little bit more time with that. Don't feel like you can't do that. But 36 weeks is a fairly easy jog through this curriculum. We enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. You'll see the videos as we went through week by week as we covered those ancient civilizations. So today what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through this curriculum if you're thinking about doing it. I'm going to walk you through what comes in the printed guide as well as a few of the books and literature selections as just a kind of a taster. I'm not going to show you all the books, but just some of them. So you kind of get a good idea of what you're going to be exposed to. And we'll go ahead and hop into it right now. Now we start with the curriculum here. We've printed it into the binder, nice 1-inch binder, I think here, 1.5-inch binder, probably fits the entire curriculum. I think it's almost 250 pages with the appendices included as well. Give you a nice little table of contents, a little welcoming paragraph talking about the curriculum. And then here it is, the book list. Now I think this is probably the most important part of the curriculum. It gives you a good idea of the books you're going to need. They are called out in certain weeks if they're specifics, or they're called out as spines. So these are maybe books that you want to purchase. We have an entire list of videos talking about spines, alternate spines, things we liked, things we didn't like. I'll link those videos down below in the description below if you're looking for those in depth. But we see basically the breakdown of the book list. We have a big chunk of history books, a little bit of mythology, one book of poetry that will keep coming back. It's listed as a spine. The literature, which some weeks is aligned to the ancient civilizations and some weeks it's not. For example, the Tale of Despero. But then the next week, and a couple weeks later, you'll read the Golden Bowl, which is specific to a certain ancient civilization. So some weeks it is, some weeks it isn't. For ancient civilizations, it's hard to find good young adult literature to read. So I understand the challenge there, but some weeks it will be kind of just a generic book and you can maybe fill that in with what you need. There is a science section here as well. It's really a nature study, kind of a nature exploratory study. So if you've done a lot of nature studies, you may think about doing something else, maybe bolting in a different science curriculum. Never feel like you can't do that. If like, hey, this science isn't for us, we're going to take this out, and you can bolt in something new. You absolutely can do that with this curriculum. The science is separate from the other content, and they don't tie in at all to the ancient civilizations. It's just kind of a sub-theme running curriculum within the curriculum that just tracks through the weeks. And then finally, there are some books here as well for art. We did not engage as much with the art in this curriculum. We kind of embraced kind of the art of the ancient people. And we really try to focus on that. You could see that through our videos as we vlogged our way through. But there are 2 spine books. We started with it and it kind of died off for us at the end, and we went ahead and just pivoted more towards our ancient civilizations. And again, that does not mean that Build Your Library is a terrible curriculum. It just means for us, we were able to pivot into things that we enjoyed. And by all means, that is what we want to do as homeschoolers, is to pivot into the things that are the best for us. There are some documentaries that are called out, the Engineering and Empire series, which is called out and giving you the weeks of where those are, and some additional videos as well. Always helpful. Now, this is what I really like, the table of contents. So this is going to be your overarching arc of what you're going to be doing, kind of giving you that order of operations. So it's going to give you that history, the literature, the science, the topics covered, and you can see how the ancient civilizations are broken up throughout those weeks. Some weeks you may cover 4 weeks of Egypt and only 1 week of the Babylonians, right? So be aware of that as you move through, understanding that some weeks are multiple weeks, some weeks are just single weeks. Actually, some weeks may have multiple ancient civilizations in them. I believe I think the Phoenicians and the Hebrews were in 1 week. I think the Babylonians and the Assyrians were 1 week. So just keep in mind that some weeks are bundled, some weeks are not. Sometimes the literature selection will go across a couple of weeks of that civilization, so do be aware of that as well. It ends here in Arabia as you move through time. There were a couple time periods where we were moving through time and then we had to go back in time, and most notably that was the India time period. So we moved all the way up to Alexander the Great, Macedonians, Greeks taking over the Middle East, and then we went back to old ancient India and kind of did the whole Indus River Valley discovery there. So some weeks it tracks, and sometimes we have to jump back. But that's not a big problem. Just be aware that sometimes we're jumping back in time, and you may have to explain that to your child, where we are and what time period that is. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those activities. One of the things that they do a lot of in this is the narration cards. So as you're reading the literature selections, you're going to be doing these things called narration cards, and they give you a lot of ideas on what those are, and that's really helpful. And I would encourage you, when you are first starting off, to really leverage the ideas in the narration cards, and then maybe go in the direction that suits you. But as you're reading the content in the literature, you want your child to engage, and they give you some ideas on how to do that through art, through handwriting, through various other activities that you may have. They will have these narration cards, and they give you those kind of ideas right here. It's great to reference this. Again, I'm a big proponent of sticky notes to reference important pages that you tend to come back to, especially when you're moving through the guide. Using this as a good guide for you is the sticky notes to help you get to those sections, I think is super helpful. Additionally, there's copy work, and what the copy work is it's copying text from the literature that you're reading. It was a really cool thing, and we ended up getting a little notebook, and we could flip through it, and my child could do the copy work there. There's a poetry memorization. Now, this is where you have to really gauge where your learner is with respect to reading and with respect to memorization. My learner is not a great memorizer, probably because I'm not a great memorizer, and she picked up those genetics from me. There are if you're looking to do memorization, some of the poems can get a little long, and you're given multiple weeks to memorize that and then to perform that. I would go to more shorter poems for my learner because that was a little bit more of a challenge for her. And eventually, I think we just stopped the memorization work because it just wasn't working for our child. But there's a large amount of memorization work. Not large, but there's a good amount that they have to practice to memorize poems. And if you're thinking about doing this, maybe try to lean towards the shorter poems. And there's a poetry book that is called out in the text that you end up using to do the memorization. Sometimes if the poem was too long, I would go to the shorter poem, and that is absolutely fine. It doesn't pertain to something that you're doing in the curriculum. It's just what is called out in the day-to-day activity. Additionally, there are this timeline work, and I'll go ahead and show you that here in a few moments, where you're putting together this really nice timeline using some of the appendices that are shipped into with the curriculum, and doing artwork and building your own timeline. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like for us. Additionally, there's some map work, there's some additional research skills that are available. So that's really great. Then you get into it, there's a nature journal. And we did the nature journal for probably the first quarter of the book. And then it had been our third or fourth, nature-oriented science thing. And we kind of just pivoted out of that and went into our own science curriculum. But what we did experience with this curriculum was great. So if you've never done a nature journey or nature journal, focused curriculum for science, this is a great example of that. And I'll call those out in the weekly examples when we get into it. But the Nature Journal was really cool. It was a consumable, printable book where you basically are working in both workbooks. It's like a workbook in a lot of respects, and your child is going out and examining the world around them, like in their backyard or local park, and then jotting down notes and whatnot. So the Nature Journal was really great. We had a great time. Now let's take a look at an example week, and I'll just do the first week because it's a great example. Build Your Library has gone out and put together a grid for you on what you should do on a given day. Now, by no means should you look at this and say, oh my gosh, on Monday I have to do these things. On Tuesday I have to do these things. On Wednesday I have to do these things. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You do these in whatever pattern, whatever flow works best for you. You will find after the first week or a couple weeks, you will see how this content flows through the week. You may find, like we found, I liked doing a lot of the History Quest work up front because I thought it was a great introduction, and we'll go through the History Quest book in a few moments. But I liked doing all the History Quest reading on the first day, and then the second day doing all the poetry and maybe doing some other activities, but every single day I did the reading for the literature. You'll find what flow works best for you. What I liked about this book, this was kind of like a nice little check mark, and you can see here in the guide, I was using this as like, okay, I did this, I did this, I did this, I did this. So it was a good reminder of what I needed to do. But this is not the total amount of work that is called out in the curriculum. When you flip the page, they actually go into more detail on what that day one looks like. So in the first day, it talks about reading the introduction, a couple pages of the Tale of Despereaux, do the couple pages in the Nature Connection Journal, and do some copy work. Now that's 1, 2, 3, 4 things. But when you flip it, you can see here's the History Quest reading, here's the activity that you probably want to do, optional book if you want to do this as well, calls out the Despereaux work. Here's your notes and vocabulary. That's not called out in that previous sheet, but this is something you want to do. You can leverage this into the copy work. So they are obscenely big ears. And if you've read the Despereaux series or the book, you remember that Despereaux had very large ears. And so your child is practicing writing this sentence. I like to had my daughter do it multiple times. Like, I want you to write that sentence a couple times. And then I would have her, we would talk about these vocabulary words. And then I would go ahead and ask her to write those as well. So we would talk about those words, and then I would go in and read the literature. And so as I'm reading the chapters, I'd cue my learner, hey, keep an ear out for this sentence, keep an ear out for these words. And so she would be primed as we were doing it. Finally, you were talking about a little bit of the memorization work. So in the poem in the book that is called out, they want you to go ahead and read Childe Harold's Pilgrimage as your poem. And so you'll start memorizing that. And that work will be called out every single day to keep practicing that poem from Lord Byron. Finally, you'll have the science section. Here's your Nature Connection, and you should read that. As you see here, the Nature Connection is called out, and it's called out here as well. So sometimes there's more work, so you don't want to just use this as your to-do guide. You want to go in here, and because a lot of times there's more information that's been detailed, and then so on and so forth. Every single day has an entire page that calls out that work. So not only would I cross it off on that page, I would cross it off here. And if sometimes you couldn't get to something, I would just put an X, just to tell myself, hey, we're probably not going to do that today or this time. I'll go ahead and do that later, or I'll go ahead and just not schedule that in, or maybe do something else. Continuing on, we went ahead and you can see day 3. Continuing on, day 4, have a pretend archaeological dig. We didn't do that. We didn't have enough time to get to that, so I would just check that off and say, well, we'll go ahead and do something, or I'll watch a video on people doing an archaeological dig as an alternative to that activity. Again, pivoting is absolutely fine. Not every single thing is required, and you're not a bad person for not doing anything, those things. So again, here's day 5. So going back to that sheet, this is the day 5, and it's the final bit of content. When you have finished this week, it will jump to your next one. My wife had put in some additional pages here on work for us to do, but the next one would be week 2. And again, you will just continue on in that pattern. And essentially every single week it follows that flow of the curriculum, where you have a call out of information, you have more detailed activities, and then you go ahead and just execute. By the end of the curriculum, you become kind of like a machine where you're kind of just doing the work, because you understand what needs to be done here, and you get really, really familiar with the expectations. Again, continuing through here, using the check marks is a great way for me to keep track of what we're doing, because sometimes I would do things ahead of time. As I said, I sometimes would do the readings early, and so I would have to go into day 1, day 2, and day 5 and make those check marks. So I was constantly flipping back and forth between these pages, keeping track of what I was doing. So here at the end of the curriculum, we'll have finished our final week of day 36, day 5. You're done. Congratulations. Now at the end of the curriculum, there's additional activity pages, maps, and at the end there's the appendices with some additional coloring pages and activities. These are all very dependent on if you want to do these things. This was obviously an interview with a relative, nomadic tribes today. Here's the Greek alphabet if that's something you want to reference. Obviously, you can print that off yourself, but it's given to you there as well. Sometimes there's nice coloring maps. You can then leverage these into the timeline work, or you can just print them off as needed in Mesopotamia. Sometimes I would print off maps by myself if we were going after a specific area or region of the world. I would do a zoomed in map, maybe print that off myself. But there are these maps that are provided for you at the very end. And then finally, there's timeline figures, but we don't have those because I have used them in the timeline guide and our timeline, and I'll go ahead and show that to you in a second here. Then at the very end, there's just some additional information, some lists and pages, and finally some optional books for you to use if you're looking for some additional books that maybe you want to slide into certain weeks. But let's go ahead and I'll show you the timeline work that we did as part of this curriculum. So here we are with our timelines, and these are basically these trifold mini project boards. I got them at Walmart for like, I don't know, $2. I ended up using about 3 of them. I thought I might have needed to use 4, but I think we were able to get it all done in this time period. And so basically the timeline, when I open it up, this was the first one, it looks like, and I drew these horizontal lines, and I kind of had it as a timeline as we were going through, and I had my learner marking the timelines and the names of the places we were studying at the time. Sometimes she would draw pictures, like look at that stellar Peru with the alpaca. I think I drew that for her and she copied over it, but I'll give her the credit. The pyramids here, just all these really cool little things that maybe were keyed in on some of the books and some of the artwork that we were able to take a look at with. Some of these pictures here that looks like they're cutouts and colored. These are the images that are at the back of that appendices, those famous people or famous persons. And then she would go ahead and color those, cut them out, and go ahead and glue them in. Once we ran out of space, we went ahead and opened the next one. And again, you can see here, so she has, picture of Alexander. I said, I got the head. Why don't you draw the rest of the body? A little bit looking a little plump there, Alexander. But this is just another example of just this continuous work that goes along as we add on. And it was a really fun project that I didn't think we were going to enjoy this, but I actually really liked giving this activity to her. It was something that could occupy her. It was something that she could enjoy and be creative and pick out pictures and art from the books and really kind of explore the various spaces. And the final one was the Great Wall of China, and we had a good time there. But anyway, so these were the simple little boards. I'll go ahead and put a link to something like this in the show notes below, that if you're looking to pick this up. These trifold project boards were just perfect because I could store them right on the shelf and pull them off as needed. So let's talk about the spine of spines if you're thinking about this curriculum, and that is the History Quest history book, early times book. This book is essentially what the curriculum is designed towards. So you will notice every single week, every single ancient civilization, the entire curriculum follows this book lock stop all the way to the end. There are 26 chapters. Sometimes the reading is spanned across 2 weeks, so that's how we get the 36 weeks out of 26 chapters. Sometimes, and I'll show you an example of how that's done, but Sometimes these chapters will be stretched across 2 weeks as opposed to the one, as a way to kind of bulk up the book and align with the curriculum to be 36 weeks. But every single chapter has essentially two pieces. It tells you the history of that place, or whatever they're trying to talk about. Like, for example, this is Andes Mountain Civilizations. And so there's a big write-up about that, and we'll show an example. Actually, the example we're going to actually talk about today is Assyria. So Assyria, they'll talk all about Assyria and why they're important, what developments happen, and what major figures or events were the most important of that time frame over the course of a couple pages. And then there's a second section called the history hop, where it will go into more depth about an individual. Sometimes it goes into the mythology, maybe a battle, a famous person, and that's told in the second person. And we'll go ahead and show you what that looks like. So let's go ahead and jump to chapter 10, which is the Assyria section. Always some nice artwork here. And I would really, really recommend bookmarks on these types of things in order for you to get to those chapters fast. So nice little simple intro, and then you can see the level of reading that you're doing. Now what they're expecting you to do here, and the chapter should end here. Yep. And so the course of it looks like about 8 pages. They are expecting you to read that over the course of the week. So on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you'll read essentially 2.5 pages a day. My reader, my learner can handle longer form text like this. And so a lot of times what I would end up doing was reading the whole first chapter on one day. And that was like all 8 or 9, 10 pages. I would read that on the first day. I'd be talking to her as we read, maybe pausing, asking a certain question. And she would then answer those questions, and we would continue on. And maybe a lot of times she would be doing her timeline work while I was reading this to her. She's a great audio listener. She enjoys audiobooks. So me reading to her about this was great. And a lot of times I timed this day where we did all this reading was the day that her sister was at preschool. And so I was able to sit down and we could go through it nice and slowly and enjoy ourselves, and without being distracted by a 4 or 3-year-old at the time. So as you can see, it's just solid walls of text. So there are very little, if ever, any intermediate images. So it's basically just wall of text, and very often they end it with an image here. And then you can see the picture's done. They give you some additional footnote information, and then that section is done. So in that set of 10 pages, they've told you in very broad brushstrokes the most important thing that is important about that civilization at that time. So this was Assyrians, and so they talked a lot about the ironwork. And then a lot of times the things that they're keying in on that chapter, when they go into the history hop, it is then brought out. And then this is told in a different manner. It's second person, as if you are telling your reader what they're doing. The last time you woke up in the past, you found yourself floating in the air above the strong walls of Babylon. In this journey, you visited the capital city of the Babylon Empire when it was under the most famous emperor Nebuchadnezzar. So you're telling this story. So the learner is experiencing these stories, and they go through kind of guided along and interact with people. And so there's dialogue in here, and they're talking about, the importance of that individual, or the importance of the discovery of what they're doing. And so in this case, you're talking to just a regular iron worker, and your learner's essentially gone back in time, and they're watching how they produce that ironworks. Here's the bellows here, and he's pulling some coal into it or whatnot. And then it's done, and then it goes on to the next chapter. And here we're talking about Persia. So essentially, every chapter is told in those two pieces, the history hop and then the history at the beginning. And that just follows all the way through. We have done full-on reviews of this book. We did them in the series. This is a great history book, great introduction. I enjoyed reading this. I enjoyed, just as an adult, learning a lot about these civilizations that maybe I hadn't only heard, a few snippets here and there. I felt coming out of this, I was a lot more knowledgeable just myself, not only what my learner learned as well. But let's go ahead and take a look at another book. Hop into the world mythology for children. Oh, that last name looks familiar. This is Sarah Cook. This is the daughter of Emily Cook, the creator of Build Your Library. And this is their mythology book. This book is available on Amazon. It is very short. You're very often going to read 1 or 2 of these little chapters. Famous stories told in more of a simplistic form. So typically about 2 to 3 pages a story. Sometimes they may be even a little bit shorter. Talking about and they don't cover every single ancient civilization. So you're going to maybe about half of them will be called out here. These are very simple, short little mythology books. We would recommend you buying this to support Build Your Library, but also just having the book is fairly easy read. If you have a more advanced reader, or if you're doing this curriculum with a student and you're bringing along an older reader, this is a perfect thing for a third grader to be able to read on themselves or to read to their younger sibling. Next book that is called out as a spine, and we would recommend you buying this because it has the longevity, is the Usborne Encyclopedia of World History. We call it the Knight book because it has the knight on the front of it. This book we have used through not only ancient civilizations, but we've used it for our prehistory curriculum that we did as well, by all the really great prehistory information that is leading up to the ancient civilizations, which starts about here. And what's awesome about this book is that it's about 2 to sometimes 4 pages on the write-ups. Great artwork, super easy reading, just an absolutely fantastic reading experience, just kind of full of information. And what's great is that when you're done with the ancient civilizations, it goes right into the medieval world, which is the following curriculum, the level 2, and it goes right into the medieval world, continuing on. And I think it goes all the way up to modern times as well, covering basically all of world history. So this is just a great reference book to have. We enjoyed pulling this off the shelf. I enjoyed using this to drive a lot of our art projects. A lot of these little drawings and whatnot made it into some of our timeline work. Sometimes I would go off and print off additional coloring pages and things of that nature. A lot of these diagrams on houses was really cool. This was a great book. We used the heck out of this book. We're going to keep this on the shelf. This is in my respect, a must purchase for this curriculum because I really just kind of feel it brings everything together. Here's another spine that is called out in the curriculum. And again, we're not going to talk about every single spine. We have a video on that, and that's down in the show notes below if you're looking for more detailed information on the spines. But just an example of another spine that you would have. And this is A Child Through Time. This is a great book series where you're able to pull these experiences and what was the kind of a good understanding of what the day-to-day life was like for these people living in these ancient times, and it's always told through the eyes of a child. And that is something I think is such a great way to teach young children, is because they can see themselves in these children, and really kind of think about, what would life be like if I lived in ancient Egypt? What would I be like if I was Leonidas in Sparta? What would that be being a young king? Aurelia in Rome, or looking at the clothes through time and all this type of stuff. So it's just a great book. We really love this. Ancient Mesopotamia, First Peoples here. Obviously, some countries you don't talk about because it's kind of mainland Europe. But this is just a great book. I enjoy this. We have a number of this. We use these books for our around the world journey as well. So we have The Child Through Time. We have a School Like Mine, Child Like Mine. All these like mine child books are just absolutely great. We really recommend you getting these. Another book available is the Natural World book, and you probably saw that called out when we were going through the weekly curriculum example. But basically, this is just your science curriculum where you're just reading about animals and reading about biomes and bugs and all these creatures and all the breakdowns of the biology of these little critters, and breakdown of what the different types of beaks and feet of birds. This is a great book. There's a whole series of these the Curiosity Tree books. We have a couple of them, but the Natural World one is called out, and it's a great book. This is well worth your money to purchase this book, and I think it's a nice cornerstone to sit on your shelf. Finally, let's talk a little bit about what would a literature selection look like. And there's a bunch of books you called out, and we're just going to showcase 2 of them here just so you have a good idea of what it's like. This is the Golden Bowl. It sets in, I think, the Babylon time frame, if I'm right, Mesopotamia. It's about a story about a young boy who's called out of the farm, and he's brought into the city to learn to become a gold worker inside this ancient city. This was a great book. I enjoyed reading this one, but you can see the difficulty of reading is a little bit more elevated than if you've done the level 0 level with the Around the World journey. Now you're coming into level 1. You're reading more deep chapter books that have chapters that are multiple pages, 10-ish, 7 or 8, 10-ish pages long. you're reading multiple chapters in a sitting. The expectation is leveled up here, and then that's okay. And for my child, it was great. She was about 7. I think she finished this curriculum when she was 8. So we kind of were at the tail end of the time expectation for this curriculum, but she did really well for this. Mary Pope Osborne, if you know that name, probably rings a bell. You're like, oh, Magic Tree House lady. She wrote these 2 great books, Part 1 and Part 2, which basically condensed the entire story of the Odyssey, chapter by chapter, into more of a simple readable form for us to read to our children. So basically, it's told in multiple parts. I think each book has like 3 parts. Yeah, book 1, The One-Eyed Giant, Land of the Dead, and the Sirens and Sea Monsters. And then there's a part 2 that tells the end of the story as he gets home to Telemachus and Penelope. There are some nice art, but again, not a lot of pictures in these. And sometimes there's some art. They'll crop up periodically in the book, but for the most part, the book is really just a bunch of text. And so these are the types of expectations of the level of the books we're starting to get into as we get into this level 1 curriculum. I hope that walkthrough helped you when you're trying to make a decision on the curriculum that you're looking to do. Now, I know the curriculum is not very expensive, but a lot of times the curriculums that are digital will require you to buy some spines, which all of a sudden you start to add it up and you're thinking, there's $100 in spines here and there. We have some great videos down below when you are trying to consider, what spine should I buy? Are there some alternates that maybe I can use that can do the same thing? We have videos on this curriculum down below in that playlist. Now, this curriculum is about $40, targeting that 6 to 8-year-old range, and I think that's very appropriate. I think the reading selections are just on point. Nothing too difficult, nothing too complicated, but very enjoyable and well thought out stories. And in the weeks where you're not reading anything that's like directly pertaining to that civilization, the reading selections are just amazing. We really love this curriculum. It covers your lit, poetry, handwriting, memorization, science, art. It's got everything. So you just bolt on your reading curriculum and bolt on a nice math curriculum, and that's all you need for your homeschool. We love this. We did it in about 36 weeks, plus or minus a couple of weeks based on, got to go on some vacations. Maybe kids got to go see grandparents, and so slides a little bit, but 36 weeks is very doable. You may find there's a civilization that your learner loves. We had a family, another family of ours who they made it the Greek summer because their daughter really loved Greece. And so they spent a lot more time. And that's okay for you to do at home when you're making this type of decisions. Be flexible, have fun. Don't be so rigid, hot swap things in and out that you maybe aren't working for you. But the spine of this curriculum is just fantastic. The History Quest book that we reviewed was fantastic. This was such an enjoyable experience. We highly recommend it to you, and hopefully this helps you make a better decision on what you guys plan to do in your homeschool.